This video is sponsored by the Ides of March, a 100-player Warhammer 40k and Age of Sigmar GT held on March 7th through 9th, 2025. More about them later on in the video. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k. This is the weekly 40k video series where we go through undefeated lists from the past weekend, looking through large events and talking about what has taken them down. And this is going to be a bit of a spicy one because we are already seeing some positive results from the new detachments that are releasing for Grozmas. For those who don't know, new detachments are being released every single day for the month of December. I've been talking about them on the channel. I have a whole playlist of videos discussing each one of these detachments and breaking them down, and we've already seen one go undefeated at a grand tournament, which we'll be talking about in a bit. So let's dive into a metagame breakdown and discuss exactly what is winning this week. First off, to no one's surprise, Genestealer Cults are doing pretty well, taking down the Iron Cage Winter Whammy 2, the Iron Halo Hobart, and Gaming Arena GTs. Keeping in the Hive Mind theme, Tyranids also had a great weekend. They won Felice Exterminatus as well as Grimdark 23. Now, Felice Exterminatus is one of the largest events of the weekend, and Tyranids did take it down with a Crusher Stampede, but we are not going to be talking about that one today because Grimdark 23 was won by none other than Tyranid Warrior Bioform Onslaught, the new Grozmas detachment focused on Tyranid warriors, and that is what we are going to be discussing this week. Chaos Knights with 2 undefeated results at the Quebec City Open, and also with a 5-0-1, so that's with a draw on the record at Felice Exterminatus. Astra Militarum took down the Finnish champs as well as the LVO Preparation GT. Tau took down one of the larger events of the weekend, Mary Slaneschmus. World Eaters took down the Fight Before Christmas. World Eaters were one of 2 undefeated armies at the Fight Before Christmas with a pretty interesting list as well. Excited to talk about that one. Adepta Sororitas also 5-0 at the Fight Before Christmas. Orks took down Our Zero Heroes Unleashed. Necrons winning the Winter Wa. Drukhari at the 4th annual Jingle Bombs Throwdown. And 2 insane factions tying at the Hyper 331 GT for the final placement. This was Chaos Demons and Imperial Agents, and again, I am psyched to talk about these lists. Before we dive into that though, if you want to know where to watch these, we did get some coverage this weekend. Brothers in Arms, a team event, was streamed over by Glasshammer Gaming, and our friends over at Wargames Live did stream that Felice Exterminatus event, so if you want to see the Tyranid Crusher Stampede take that one down, that was live on stream. And as always, thank you to everybody who supports Tactical Tortoise, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, or YouTube channel members you can join in the link down in the video description. Also, Twitch subscribers who support me over on my live streams. All you people are amazing. And let's dive into some lists just after a word from our sponsor. The Ides of March are approaching, and you should beware of missing the Ides of March GT held by Treasure Trove Keep on March 8th through 9th, 2025. This is the second year that the Ides of March Grand Tournament will be running, and if you are just hearing about it for the first time ever, it is a 100-player GT held up in Rockport, Maine. The event is held at the Samoset Resort, an absolutely gorgeous location taken from me as someone who was there last year. Oh my god, the location is incredible. You get wonderful views and beautiful weather while you're playing some Warhammer 40k. In addition to a 5-round Warhammer 40k GT, there is also a 100-player AOS event if you're more of a fantasy connoisseur. There is also the Ides of March Golden Brush painting competition that is judged by none other than Goobertown Hobbies. So if you don't want to be a goober yourself, you should head on over to treasuretrovekeep.com/Ides of March 2025 and go get yourself a ticket. I'll also be there at the event live streaming, so you can catch coverage of it here on the channel, but really I would rather see you on camera in person at the tournament. So get your tickets today and I'll see you there. Some Genestealer Cults. We're over here at the Iron Halo Hobart event. This was a relatively small, only 24-player event held down in Australia. This one was taken down by James Stewart, who was running Genestealer Cults. Now, the reason we're talking about this is that we've got some Outlander Claw action for you today. All of the other Genestealer Cults that we've seen this week were running Biosanctic Brood Surge. We did see a little bit of play out of Outlander Claw, and interestingly, it was a little different than the normal builds that we see. This list was running a pair of Beneficti, Benefictusi. One of them running Assault Commando, the other one with Cartographic Data Leech. So that Data Leech is going to improve the ballistic skill of weapons fired out of an open-topped vehicle that the Benefictus is in. The Assault Commando allows him to get hit rerolls when his unit disembarks a transport. So a little bit of transport synergy with those two guys. We then also have 3 Kellermorphs as well as a Clamavus. Kellermorphs obviously in there for their reactive fire, just useful lone operatives. We have a bunch of Acolyte hybrids, 2 units with auto pistols for their melee profiles, alongside 5 units with hand flamers, and a bunch of Neophyte hybrids, 2 units of 10 of those guys. These guys were being carried to the battle in a pair of Goliath trucks. Following that up, we also have 3 units of Achilles Ridge Runners, 2 units of 2 with mining lasers, as well as 1 with a heavy mortar and a Survey Auger to strip cover from enemies. We have 2 units of Atalan Jackals as well, alongside 3 Goliath Rock Grinders. Those guys can carry those smaller Acolyte hybrid units into the fight as well. Pretty interesting list here. Definitely a focus on Beneficti. Has been a little bit of a push of the detachment in recent weeks, but is definitely something surprising and new to see. So with that, let's go ahead and travel over to Sweden to talk about Grimdark 23. The reason that we're talking about this event, it did end with a 4-0-1 record for Tyranids as the top placer. Jacob Holmstrom went undefeated with the faction, although this did use differential scoring, so we did have that much greater chance of getting that draw over a normally scored event. However, the cool thing about this is that Jacob here was running a Warrior Bioform Onslaught detachment. For those who don't know and who have never heard of this detachment before, it's because it only released on, I think, Tuesday, maybe? So the fact that it was A, being allowed is awesome, and B, went undefeated is super duper cool. Now, for those who don't know, this detachment, I have a whole video about this detachment and all the abilities and stratagems it can use. Essentially, it is a Tyranid warrior-focused detachment. It has a lot of buffs for Tyranid warrior keyworded stuff, so warrior units like these ranged bioweapon warriors get invulnerable saves. They also have a bunch of really beneficial enhancements for Tyranid primes as well, and we can also just put Neurotyrants into Tyranid warrior units, so lots and lots of buffs for these guys. But generally, and a cool thing about not only this detachment but also a lot of the Gratzmus detachments is that they have a focus on a particular unit type or an archetype, but they also have some support for other units in the faction as well. So many of the stratagems have an enhanced effect on warriors. However, you can use them on other stuff for a slightly lesser effect. And that is what Jacob was using in this detachment specifically. So we are running a Neurotyrant with that Synaptic Tyrant ability that allows him to attach to warrior units and gives them +1 to hit thanks to the Neurotyrant's leadership effect. We also have a Winged Tyranid Prime. This guy has Ocular Adaptation, which gives a similar +1 to hit to his unit. So we're able to take 2 Tyranid warrior units, both of them with that hit bonus. We then have a Biovore, 3 Exocrines. The Exocrines do have some synergy inside this detachment. They can benefit from Parasitic Payload to have cover stripped from their targets by ranged warrior units, which I think, as we'll see, is basically going to be the focus of the detachment. We also have Spontaneous Hyper Corrosion, which adds +2 strength to those guys, putting them up to a pretty impressive strength 11. Not super impressive when you think about it, but when you consider that Tyranids don't really have access to that style of weapon, a high volume, pretty solid anti-tank gun, that's a huge benefit for Exocrines. We also then have 3 Maleceptors. Those guys can act as a solid front line and also benefit from all of those same effects. And having a lower AP value, the Maleceptors definitely appreciate that Parasitic Payload a little bit more. We then have the focus of the list, 2 units of Tyranid ranged bioweapon warriors. Now, I think before the detachment release, these guys were not really played at all, which with good reason. They're relatively cheap and they have a ton of attacks, but to be honest, Those attacks aren't particularly exciting. They have kind of mediocre melee profiles. The range profiles are hamstrung by a 4+ ballistic skill. However, the benefits are that, first of all, they're super cheap. They're only about 20 points per model, which is great. 22, 21 and a half or so, just about. And they also get a ton of heavy weapons. So in a unit of 6, you get 2 venom cannons as well as 2 barbed stranglers. So they're firing 2d3 blast multi-damage shots plus 2d6 plus 2 blast strength 6 shots. As soon as you can buff those with the +1 to hit from either that ocular adaptation or the nearby Neurotyrant, these guys start to get pretty consistent on their damage output. Especially if you can also bring something like a Hive Tyrant and they get lethal hits, the volume of fire that these guys put out is actually very impressive. So I've been impressed by the Tyranid warriors in this detachment. As an additional benefit, they also get OC3 as the second part of the detachment ability. So they have a 5+ invulnerable save. There's a stratagem to regenerate them. There's a stratagem to make them -1 to be wounded. And they're also super high OC when not battle shocked on objectives. So they themselves also act as a really good front line. We also then have 3 Tyrannofexes as well. So this list is very light on utility, but it has a ton of monsters. 9 monsters in total, backed up by those ranged bioweapon warriors, or the stratagems that you can apply to them as well. I guess a Synaptic Amplification is also another one. You can give them reroll wound rolls of 1 on basically anything in any phase. So not a lot of melee going on in this list. We're mostly here just to power through people with an immense amount of monsters. But man, what an insane take on this warrior detachment. I think the ranged bioweapon warriors have been given a new lease on life in this Tyranid warrior bioform onslaught. You can also play the melee warriors as a melee counterpunch as well. Obviously, we didn't consider that to be quite as necessary this time around, but what a cool list and an interesting play on this archetype. Now with that, we're gonna go across the pond over to Quebec City. We saw the Quebec City Open 3. This was a 32-player GT, and this one was taken down by Eric Marcoux running Chaos Knights. Some dominating scores from Eric here, and he was playing what is largely a fairly normal version of Chaos Knights with a little bit of spice sprinkled on top. We had a single Wardog Stalker as the Warlord, plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Wardog Brigands, plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Wardog Carnivores, fairly standard stuff. However, then we have a little bit of spice in the back here. A unit of Blue Horrors. These guys are pretty nice. They're basically taking up the place of the Nurglings that we would typically see. The difference being that Blue Horrors are a Battle Lion unit and they do infiltrate. However, they can split into Brimstones. They are much harder to kill than Nurglings, and they have an OC value, so they can act as utility by themselves. On top of that, we also have an Exalted Flamer. This guy's pretty sweet. He actually probably doesn't see enough play. He has some really good ranged output, and after he shoots at a unit, he can slow them down if they're infantry. So he has the potential to lock down fast enemy infantry units from getting into the Chaos Knights. Now, obviously, it is a little inconsistent. He has to hit them and he has to roll a 4+ in order to do that. But if he's able to do all those things, the Exalted Flamer can actually potentially keep threats off of your knights as they're moving up and dominating the center of the table with their high OC values. And you have to take the Blue Horrors in order to unlock that guy, hence why we're taking that unit in place of the normal Nurglings. Not to mention the fact that the Blue Horrors are just a useful unit in general. A little bit of a cool take on Chaos Knights, but obviously the War Dog spam is nothing that we haven't seen before. Now we're going to remain in Canada for a little bit here. We're going to move over to Calgary, Alberta, and go to the LVO Preparation GT featuring Friendship. That's very nice. Adam Green took this one down with Astra Militarum. Adam was running Gonskos, Lord Solar Leontis, 3 Tempestus command squads, alongside a platoon command squad, as well as 2 tank commanders and Ursula Creed. We have an infantry squad, so the full Lord Solar Leontis Vox combo is online, a Chimera, as well as 2 Taurox Primes, a Kazarkin unit. We have a Rogodorn battle tank to benefit from those tank commander orders, 2 Scout Sentinels to support the army, as well as a bunch of Tempestus Ions. 2 units of 5, so those guys are going to be hopping into the Taurox Primes. When shooting at an enemy on an objective, they get hit rerolls, and then when they shoot something that the Taurox Prime shot, they get wound rerolls as well the turn that they disembark. So these guys have an absolutely staggering damage output, especially once you start contributing additional orders onto them. If they have command rods on their command squads. One of them does, and he also has Grand Strategist, so he can hop in and issue 2 orders to his unit because the command rod allows him to double up. If we had command rods on the other Tempestor Primes, what we could potentially do is actually put Ursula Creed inside the transports with them. She obviously doesn't benefit from her CP cost reduction aura, but she can disembark and then order them as well. We could do something similar with Gaunt's Ghosts. Gaunt can actually jump in next to these units and order them on top of the other orders that they're receiving. So there's a lot of ways to get orders on these guys, and what we're probably just doing is getting +1 to hit and then full rerolling to try to get sustained hits and lethal hits if we're shooting at infantry, or just getting +1 shot on our plasma guns. But once all of the combos are active and these guys get full rerolls, they do insane damage with these fire support transports. And that moves us over to Mary Slaneshmus in Washington. This event was a fairly large GT, running 91 players. This was won by Donald Plummer, who was running Tau Empire in a fairly straightforward Retaliation Cadre build. Now, we've been seeing Retaliation Cadres like this pop up every once in a while. In my opinion, it's the most impressive that I've seen Tau be in 10th edition. The amount of damage and flexibility that this faction provides is absolutely nuts, and it's very cool to see it have some success. So we have Commander Farsight, as well as 2 Cold Star Commander battlesuits and an Enforcer Commander battlesuit. That Enforcer has the Starflare ignition system, so he's going to be able to hop up and down. Cold Star Commander battlesuit has internal grenade rack, so he's able to bomb people and running fusion blasters alongside another Cold Star Commander with a variety of weapons. We then have 2 individual broadside battlesuits with rail cannons, 2 units of Fire Knife teams, as well as a Star Scythe team and 2 Sunforge teams. I imagine that we're placing the Fusion Blaster Cold Star Commander into one of the Sunforge teams. The other one, the place can be taken up by Farsight, who gives them +1 to wound when they're close enough to their targets, which is great. We then also could drop in the Plasma Rifle Enforcer battlesuit. He can jump into one of the Fire Knife squads with those plasma rifles. He gives them that Starflare ignition uppy downy, so he can redeploy them around the table to get shots with these slightly longer range plasma rifles. We've also got a Fire Knife battlesuit unit with missile pods. That guy is attaching the last Cold Star Commander with a Cyclic Ion Blaster and high output burst cannon. And then the Star Scythe battlesuits with 6 flamers are just going to run in and sweep infantry in the matchups where they're needed. We then have a Ghost Keel battlesuit who can use all the battlesuit synergies as well as play aggressively and hold down the table. We have a Kroot Carnivore team for Scout, a Pathfinder team to add some additional spotting to the army, another Vespid Stingwing team in order to get some uppy downy and some utility in the list, plus 3 units of stealth battlesuits for all the incredible reasons that stealth battlesuits are good. Infiltrators, marker drones, spotting, rerolls on the spot, it's all great. Like I said, not the first time that we've seen a list like this, but oh boy, is it impressive to see on the table. Just a tide of battlesuits using insane redeployment effects, the ability to deep strike 3 inches away, jump around the table, get huge benefits when near by their opponents, and do absolutely extravagant damage. Now we're going to go back to Oceania over here and go over to New Zealand, going to the Fight Before Christmas. This was a 50-player GT, and this one was taken down by a pair of players, Matt Van Wisk as well as Robert Holman. Both went undefeated. We're going to talk about both of these lists right now, but we're going to start with this insane World Eaters list that doesn't have Angron in it. Look at that. We're letting Angron rest today and only playing Karn the Betrayer as our warlord. Following him up, we have a unit of Jackals, a big unit of 10 Khorne Berserkers, and a little unit of 5 Khorne Berserkers, as well as a Rhino to get some of those guys to the fight. We've also then got 3 units of 3 8-bound, as well as 3 units of 6 Exalted 8-bound. It seems like World Eaters might do better the more 8-bound you place in their army. I don't know. It just seems like the trend. Last and certainly not least, we have 2 units of 2 Chaos Spawn in order to perform our utility duties. Pretty straightforward list, literally just cutting everything that isn't an 8-bound almost exactly. Definitely seems like it worked out though. Obviously most World Eaters lists are focusing very heavily on 8-bound. It's just interesting to see one that doesn't have Angron and instead takes more of those heavy infantry units. Pretty wild one, to be honest. Adepta Sororitas also went undefeated at this event. Richard Holman taking down a 5-0 record, rocking a Canoness with Jump Pack with Through Suffering Strength, the ability to enhance her attacks and get an additional enhancement when she is wounded. We have the Demonifuge. We have the Demonifuge as well. These 2 are incredible in specifically Hallowed Martyrs because of suffering and sacrifice. You can force enemy units to target the Demonofuge when they're engaging them, and because Ephriel Stern and Kaiganel heroically intervene for free, they can set up weird situations where they can force the opponent to attack them regardless of their charge target. So for example, if you have them 6 inches away from a unit that is very important, your opponent charges into that unit, you heroically intervene for 0 CP with the Demonofuge, then for 1 CP you suffering sacrifice. You get to fight first because the unit has fight first, so they get to swing with their 10 pretty solid melee attacks. Then the opposing unit has to attack Ephriel Stern and Kaiganel. Ephriel Stern goes down, you use Divine Intervention, she comes back and ready to do it again the next turn as well. Interestingly, we also have 2 Hospitallers in here alongside Morven Vol. No Triumphant Catherine today. We're leaving the free 6s on Miracle Dice at home, but that might be for the best with how expensive that unit is. And we'll see how December treats Adepta Sororitas Miracle Dice mechanics. I know a lot of people have some very stern thoughts on them. We have a Battle Sisters squad. This one's kitted out with Meltaguns, an Immolator, as well as a Sororitas Rhino, 2 Castigators, and 2 units of Celestian Sacrosants. So that's where our Hospitallers are going to be going. The Hospitallers can reanimate dead Sacrosants to the unit and provide the unit with a 5+ Feel No Pain ability and turn on their abilities for being led by a character, like their -1 to be wounded. So they actually are relatively tough to kill. An Invulnerable Save, a Feel No Pain, -1 to wound, and regeneration. It's all fairly tough to put down, and even if you don't kill them, they're going to get those Hallowed Martyrs attack and wound bonuses. We have 2 individual Mortifiers with 2 Heavy Bolters apiece, a Paragon Warsuit unit from Morven Vol to hop into, alongside a Seraphim squad and a Zephyrim squad. Seraphim squad just in there as a utility unit with Hand Flamers. The Zephyrim squad in there as an attachment to the Canoness, most likely, not to mention that their banner also provides them a charge bonus, so that's also pretty good too. Now it's time to talk about some more Xenos. Over there in Germany, Our Zero Heroes Unleashed, a 27-player GT went down. This one was taken down by Roman Kleiber running Orks. Roman was playing a Bully Boys detachment, running 2 Beast Bosses, Boss Snickrot is a little bit of a utility guy, and 3 Mega Armor War Bosses, one of them with the Teleporta to teleport him onto the battlefield, plus Zodgrod Wartsnaga. We've got 2 units of Beast Snagga Boys to attach the regular Beast Bosses into, as well as a standard unit of boys for OBSEC, 1, 2, 3, 4 trucks, as well as a big Flashgits mob, a big mob of 20 Gretchen to attach Zodgrod Wartsnaga into, alongside another unit of 10 Gretchen to camp the backline objective, 3 units of 5 Mega Knobs to attach those Mega Knob War Bosses into, give them all of those detachment abilities, and improve their hit roll, which they'll need to because they do have those twin kill saws, so only weapon skill 4 on those guys. However, their melee damage is impressive, especially on the Wa turn, of which you get 2, which is nice. And we have another unit of Storm Boys for utility as well. Way more heavily armored for this variety of list, and it's interesting to see the 4 trucks as well. A lot of times we would see Gasco Thraka in here, kind of babying one of those Mega Knob units around. Not today. Instead, we're just delivering the Mega Knobs with the trucks. The trucks can transport up to 6 Mega Armored units, so the 5 Knobs plus the War Boss makes total sense. And then we have another 2 trucks to get the Beast Snagga Boys into melee. Now with that, we're going to move on over to the United Kingdom for Dalwinter Wa 2024. This was a reasonably sized 47-player GT. This was won by Necrons, Andy Quas Cohen going undefeated 5-0 with the Army. Andy was playing a Hypercrypt Legion focused on big, heavy vehicles. It was supported by a Catan Shard of the Nightbringer to act as a bit of a melee counterpunch. We also had 3 Hexmark Destroyers in there to just be our utility characters. Then the Silent King. The Silent King was being followed around by a Canoptic Spider to give him that Feel No Pain. And then we got 2 Doomsday Arcs to act as his backup shooting, plus a Deathmark unit and a Flayed One unit, in addition to 2 Locust Destroyers for utility. Last, and certainly not least, we've got a Tesseract Vault in here as well. This is an absolutely wild list, but definitely something that we've seen before. We've actually seen Hypercrypt Legions like this doing fairly well over the course of the edition. We've seen a lot of pretty good results from armies like this, where the Silent King and sort of just teleports around the table with his attendant Doomsday Arcs, supporting the Tesseract Vault, as that thing can actually cosmic precision into interesting places to get its powers of the Catan on target. And then once your opponent finally takes the Tesseract Vault down, you have to deal with those 2 Doomsday Arcs and the Silent King. Most armies don't have the capacity to kill all of that beef, especially once it's repositioning, to constantly be getting shots on the target, and that ends up being pretty good for it. And with that, we're going to move over to Idaho in the US for a 22-player event, the 4th annual Jingle Bombs Throwdown. This one was won by Drukhari. Cool to see Drukhari on the table. Joseph Bedingfield went undefeated with the faction, taking a real space raid detachment, running an Archon, a Beastmaster, Lilith Hesperax, as well as Urian Rakarth. That was followed up by a unit of Kabalite Warriors, a unit of Rax, a unit of Witches, 1 Raider, as well as 3 Venoms to carry them to the table, a Kronos, unit of 6 Grotesques, an Incubi unit, a Mandrake unit, as well as a unit of Reavers, and a bunch of Scourges. 2 units of Scourges, both of them with Drukhari Haywire Blasters. No Dark Lances in sight here today. We don't need those things. But we are following that up with some Counterpunch with 3 units of Talos, 2 units of 2, and 1 unit of 1. All of those, again, equipped with Haywire Blasters. This feels like a little bit of just a hope that we are going to run into non-monster factions, because we have an enormous number of those Haywire Cannons, just hoping we don't need the Dark Lances. We do have a Dark Lance on the Raider, I guess, but that is about it. Between the Grotesques and the Talos, though, they can fight pretty well in melee, deal with hordes fairly well with the massive number of liquefier guns that they get access to, and tank through the entire world with Feel No Pains and -1 to be wounded from Insensible to Pain. So that all is pretty good. Definitely the most effective variety of Drukhari that we've been seeing more recently over Sky Splinter Assault, since they did get nerfed in the October update. And with that, we're going to move over to our last event of the week. This is the Hyper 331 GT held over in Russia. This is a 32-player event and has what is, in my opinion, the most wild result out of all of the events this week. It was tied a 66-66 natural draw between Anton Vasin and Alexander Zhelonkin. This was between a very wild Chaos Demons list as well as an Imperial Agents list. I'm so excited to talk about these two. Let's dive into Chaos Demons first. So Anton Vasin over here, who did end up winning the event off of tiebreakers, was running a Demonic Incursion. I will have to start saying that now that demons are actually getting additional detachments, so that's exciting. This only had a pair of Greater Demons in it, Be'lakor as well as Ed the Endless Gift, Great Unclean One. Chad, Bile Blade Enjoyer over here, taking the dual swords in that Great Unclean One for extra melee attacks. Pretty solid stuff. Celesk was in there, as well as a little bit of an annoying utility character. We also had 2 Bloodthrone Rendmasters. These guys have a stacking offensive buff, +1 strength, AP, and damage for Khorne units. That can affect the Skull Cannon that's in the list, in addition to the 2 units of 6 Blood Crushers. These guys can either rapid ingress into annoying spots, they can warp surge if they're in Shadow in the Warp to get to melee with advance and charge, or simply deploy off of Be'lakor and use their banner to get an easy charge out of Deep Strike. All very flexible, especially if you don't have a ton of terrain that's impeding them. They are unfortunately mounted and have a hard time positioning their bases over top of ruin walls and things like that. The Skull Cannon's an interesting inclusion, adds a little bit of ranged firepower to the list, which is also benefited by the Slaaneshi Soul Grinders that are there as well, and can also force Battle Shock checks on enemies to potentially turn on the wound rerolls from Draught of Terror or deal some additional mortal wounds. We then have a unit of Beasts of Nurgle alongside those 2 Slaanesh Warp Grinders. We don't really have any synergy inside the list for Slaanesh units, but the Slaaneshi Warp Grinders do get that pretty sweet, devastating wounds scream attack, so they do act as fairly resilient and fairly impressive ranged output. They are able to be protected by Be'lakor against return fire, because he can force enemies to be within 18 inches of them to target them, so that is pretty nice. It's hard to do that with other out-of-faction range options like Chaos Knights. This list is absolutely wild. It's so different than basically anything we've seen in Chaos Demons up until this point. I am so excited that we're seeing some Chaos Demon success, and especially with a list as wild as this one. And that moves us over to Alexander Zhelonkin running Imperialis Fleet. Alexander was taking a single Inquisitor with a Psychic Gift, as well as Inquisitor Draxus and Inquisitor Dreyfax. This was followed up by a pair of rogue trader entourages, one of them running Fleet Master in order to target her unit with some additional stratagems for free. The other one with Combat Landers to give up to 3 units Deep Strike. Because we have at least one rogue trader entourage, we're also going to be able to infiltrate one of the those units, so we can potentially do something like put an Imperial Navy Breacher team up in the front of the opponent's army at the beginning of the game. They can also then potentially redeploy units at the start of the game to return themselves to safety. We have a Watchmaster with digital weapons to give him some additional mortal wounds in melee. And it's also important to remember that we have all 4 assassins. So we can jump in and disrupt your scoring with the Calexis Assassin. The Eversword Assassin can scout and disrupt your scoring on turn 1 by killing your utility or just diving into your army. That's following up an absolutely wild selection of units. We have a 10-man Death Watch kill team for that Watchmaster to jump into. Those guys are being ferried to the battlefield in a Corvus Black Star. This thing can potentially move incredibly far to dump these guys off or deliver them into the fight. You can also use it as a strategic reserver, a unit that can rapid ingress on the table and then run a Death Watch kill team into a relevant position immediately, as well as deliver some okay shooting by itself. We have 2 units of Inquisitorial Agents, probably to attach some of those Inquisitors to, a single Grey Knight Terminator squad, as well as 2 Inquisitorial Chimeras that can be carrying around the Inquisitorial Agents. This list is pretty wild. We have a lot of transport play between the 2 Inquisitorial Chimeras, being able to deliver those 13 strong Inquisitor Agent plus Inquisitor units. We also have a lot of forward operation and reserve play between the normal detachment effect as well as the rogue trader entourages, buffing up these infiltrators and these deep strikers, plus just natural deep strike and strategic reserve abilities from the Corvus Blackstar and the Grey Knight Terminator squad. Basically, this army is going to come at you from everywhere, and if you can't set up to defeat it, it's going to outscore you very quickly because you have to constantly be screening out and being on your guard to prevent these little infantry units from getting into incredibly dangerous areas of the table. What an absolutely wild list, and what an insane tournament this one would have been. I bet absolutely insane to watch these wild armies go at it for a tie in the finals. That's nuts. But with that, that is going to be all of the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks to Ides of March for supporting the channel. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.